they went ahead and dropped some huge news on Boeing for us. Boeing CEO out. Dennis Muhlenberg, he's gone. Can you believe it? The guy has been canned. He is gone, and now they will be replacing him with a current Boeing chairman, David Calhoun, effective on the 13th. That is some wild stuff. So the question now is, what's going to happen with Boeing stock now? This guy has been in office since 2015. In office. Yeah, so that's what it is. He's been the CEO since 2015. What's going to happen to the stock now? What's going to happen with this new leadership team, and are things going to get better at Boeing? I hate to say it, but things are not great at Boeing right now. But if we're looking at Boeing stock as a result, this thing actually went up 3% today as a result of the news. So if that means anything for you, it's probably pretty helpful. If we're looking year to date, this stock is somewhere around down, pretty well flat, if I want to be fair. So, not much movement. In a year where the stock market is up, 25% around there on average. So, overall, over past 5 years, though, the stock is beating the broader market as it's up 156%. So just the past year's been pretty rough, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and we will certainly get into that. As far as where the shortcomings were with Mr. Muhlenberg, and we'll see what could possibly change with the future. So I don't think it's going to be fair to mention Muhlenberg's tenure without discussing the 737 MAX debacle. This absolutely is what overdid it. I mean, this is what is the cause of his firing, and there's no denying it by any means. This has just absolutely caused a lot of turmoil for the company, and it's hurting it quite a bit. Obviously, back in mid-March, there were a couple crashes from the 737 MAX, killing hundreds of people, which is obviously horrific. It's terrible stuff. Obviously, you don't want to see that at all, but if you think about it from the perspective of a company, obviously you don't want to be responsible for people's deaths. You don't want. I personally don't want anyone dying personally at all. I'd rather people didn't die, but you know what? It happens. Is that too pacifistic of me? It's not. It just depends. Okay, it depends. But still, due to an accident like this, it's just horrific. And if you're thinking from a business perspective, it is very costly from a business perspective as well. The amount of legal fees that go into any sort of these, because let's be fair, any one of these families of these people will sue the absolute crap out of Boeing, and it's what they deserve, frankly. If you're going to be making an aircraft that's not actually safe for air travel properly, you do deserve to be sued for all you're worth. And guess what? Boeing spent a lot of money on legal expenses because of this, and it'll be a continuing battle for them for quite a while to come because of this. So it's something to consider when looking at Boeing stock, because this isn't just something that's in and out. This is going to be a long-standing issue that they're going to have to face for quite a while. Which, everything's fine with that. They'll have to see how their new CEO can adjust to that. But naturally, now they just have a bunch of planes sitting around in hangars because they're still grounded. So they're still grounded, and United Airlines won't even fly these jets until next June, even. A lot of ones should be able to start flight again back in January, but some of these different companies might not be doing it, such as you see United Airlines. United Airlines won't be using any 737 MAX jets until June of next year. And you think about it, other companies could follow suit in terms of this. So from that perspective, these 737 Maxes are 100% a liability right now. They're just waste. They're just taking up space and they're doing nothing. They're not adding any value to this company. So, if you look at it from that perspective, it is 100% waste, 100% liability. So, on top of that, they still have people. They've just halted production on them, obviously, because why would you be producing more planes that you're not going to actually be flying? Makes plenty of sense. So, with these liabilities, this costs the company quite a bit of money to build one of these aircrafts, which they've been building consistently. It costs them quite a bit of money just to build them, just to store them. So that's something to consider here. And really, where the 737 Max fell was the company being cheap. From a perspective here, you can see that to save on cost and development, they just replaced the 737. Gave it a new engine, which did not properly. It was not the same size as the old engine, so it was a little bit larger, and it caused a lot more drag because of that. And this is really where they found that issue, was just putting a new engine on an old plane, and they did it to save costs, 10 to 15% as much in terms of costs from designing a whole new plane, as you see from this article here. So it was trying to attempt to save costs, and if you think about it in the long run, it has absolutely hurt them greatly. If we take a look at the whole tenure, this 5 years that Muhlenberg's had, I backed quite away from the mic there. I apologize. But obviously, you see the stock price is going up pretty well. If we're looking in terms of just the past 5 years, in terms of earnings, I think it's important to note relatively stagnant revenues, declining, in fact. Nothing significant going on here. Trailing 12 month is declining quite a bit. And profit margin, or gross profit, down quite a bit as well from 2015 even. There was a little bit of an increase, but again, this year's just taking a toll on that profit line. Just taking a huge toll on that profit line. So operating income still positive, so it's not like they're necessarily a money loser, which is fantastic for them. They're still making money, but it's not a good sign. Not a good sign. If we're looking in the long term, obviously, to see how it compares. So starting in 2015 in June, when he took over, this thing has been pretty well stagnant in terms of revenues. Actually, less revenue right now than had whenever he had taken over, technically, if you want to consider it that way. It is certainly something that I think is 100% fair to consider. If you look at on the bottom portion of this chart here, you see a lot more green before that 2015 mark. Then after the 2015 mark, you see a lot flatter of lines, a lot more red. And that's not necessarily going to judge the entire performance of him, what he did entirely. I don't think he ran the business horribly. I don't think that's entirely fair to say. I just think once the company gets larger like this, it is more difficult to increase that revenue. So that's part of the reason for it. But decrease is kind of scary. And it is definitely unfair to mention this without the horrific second quarter that they released this year too, in July here, where their revenue decreased 35% year over year. First half revenue decreased 19%. They actually operated on a loss of $3 million. Yikers. That's not good to see. $3 billion, that is, obviously, because obviously that's important here. Operating margin negative 21.5%. Net loss of $3 billion down the drain. Earnings per share a negative 5.21 per share. That is a horrific number. That's just a horrific earnings report. That is awful. You got to mention it. And if you want to look long term on their balance sheet now because of this, which I love looking at the balance sheet. Right now, cash and cash equivalents are not quite as much as the debt at this point. The debt is outweighing cash and cash equivalents, and I think that's going to be an issue for a little bit for this company, depending on what the new leadership tries to do. And a lot of that is just going to be continued legal expenses that they're going to be paying for years and years down the road now because of this. So that is one thing to consider if you're looking at Boeing stock. And I think probably the final thing I would like to consider with this, you need to mention the dividend. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Payout ratio of 743%. They're paying out way more than they can afford right now. And I called it. I called it there would be a decrease in 2020 in terms of what their dividend pays out, and I can guarantee there will be. So when the new CEO, new leadership takes over, I can almost guarantee as a result there will be a gutting of a lot of these expenses, and the dividend is going to be one of the first things to go. This thing's going to drop down to probably around a 1%, 1.5% yielder. I think it's going to be a relatively significant decrease in dividend, in my opinion. It might not happen, but there is absolutely no denying it is unsustainable at the current levels. So, in my opinion, they're going to be dropping this thing down at least half of what it is right now in terms of total amount given out. So, that's at least half. They probably need to do more, but for now, they might just do half and work on that. As a result, I think this stock is going to obviously get hammered if they were to cut dividend. That is one thing to consider. That'd be why I'm personally going to be staying away from Boeing stock for a little while now. I think there's too much nonsense going on. I might consider buying in potentially if we see a decrease. And if there is a dividend cut, this thing will get hammered pretty hard. I'm talking a 10% downward movement in a day, kind of hard. And it might not. I might be wrong. But if we do see that decrease, even then I might not get into this stock. Simply just for the reason that it scares me at this point. Due to just the potential legal expenses over the long term, and that scares me. That scares me quite a bit. I don't like all these legal expenses. Just looking through some lovely numbers here. Current PE ratio. That's right. Current PE ratio of 50. So obviously this thing is just at a point where it's rough. Scares the crap out of me. Total debts way outweighing the cash at this point. Scares me. So dividend's gonna get gutted. I think the stock's gonna get absolutely hammered by investors for quite a bit. In my opinion, stay away from Boeing stock right now. I trust that David Calhoun, not super familiar with his work. I think he used to work he might have been a former GE executive, which again, that company's a piece of garbage, so who knows. But I'm very familiar. I'm familiar with the name. I just don't remember where from entirely. But I should definitely look that up and see what he's done in the past. But I'm confident he might be able to turn this ship around. But right now, it needs turned around dearly. Dearly. Adios.